with the recording. That's awesome. All right. I'd love to introduce to you Kristyn Corrigan. So she is with us from AMS. She is a principal at Applied Marketing Science, where she leads the firm's Insights for Innovation practice. She has nearly 20 years of consulting experience where she helps B2B and consumer-facing companies use customer insights to develop more successful products, services, and experiences. She's a recognized leader in advancing VOC methods, including pioneering the use of AI-powered techniques to uncover customer needs with greater speed, depth, and scale. She specializes in in-depth interviewing, ethnographic research, and helping teams prioritize what matters most to customers to fuel innovation. She also trains and coaches. Many of you probably know she might have been in your places to help you with your own in-house VOC capabilities. She's been featured in Fast Company and Marketing News, and she's a contributor to the 2023 PDMA Handbook of Innovation and New Product Development. She serves on the PDMA Board of Directors and is a frequent speaker at industry conferences and podcasts. She's also lectured at MIT and University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and she regularly teaches. So I'm excited to have Kristyn here with us and tell us what they're doing lately at AMS. There you go, Kristyn.
Thank you. Is my volume okay? Can you hear me in the back? Great. It's always an awkward feeling standing there when someone's reading your introduction. It's funny, I was giving a version of this talk last year at a conference with the academic that I've been collaborating with. And the conference organizers actually put our bios into ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT if Kristyn and Artem were fictional characters, who would they be? So that was fun. My fictional character was Sherlock Holmes, always digging in and investigating, right? I kind of like that. And Artem was Harry Potter, which was also really fun. Interesting application, and it's funny, but proof that when you adjust your prompts, right, and you ask an LLM like ChatGPT to think a certain way, that it can do that. So today I want to share with you how we have fine-tuned and customized an LLM, or think about it as ChatGPT for VOC analysis, to think like a VOC analyst and to identify customer needs. Here's the agenda. I do want to start with a level set on voice of the customer. I know there has been extensive talk this morning about the importance of customer centricity and understanding the value chain. I think we can all agree on that. But when I say voice of the customer, I do want to define some terms and define some frameworks that I'll show in the case studies at the end of the talk, right? Because I think it's important that everybody get grounded on that. And before I get to those case studies, there are three. Two are B2B and one is consumer. I'll talk with you about our evolution of AI VOC analysis and explain how it works. I will qualify this to say that I am an expert in market research and customer insights. I personally am not the one that built the model. I am not a data scientist by training. I have collaborated with data scientists on the technique. However, if you have specific questions about the model, I'll be happy to connect you with the professors that I've been working with on that, okay? So let's dive in first with a little bit of history, right? So Applied Marketing Science, we specialize in voice of the customer insights, and we really pride ourselves on bringing the best of the academic world, the academy, into real world practice, especially for our B2B clients. And that started back in 1993. With the publication of Voice of the Customer by Griffin and Hauser. Foundational paper, formed the industry, really coined the term. And the frameworks outlined in that paper are still reflected in the work that we do with clients on a day-to-day basis. However, needs are changing, as we talked about this morning. There's a need for quick results, right? Our customers are talking more places than just in the one-on-one conversations we have with them, either in formal VOC processes or in sales meetings. And so we need to keep a pulse on that. So in 2018, 2019, we partnered with one of John Hauser's doctoral students, Artem Tomashenko, on an algorithm to better understand customer insights in text. And those of you that were at the 2023 meeting at Marmon may have heard us talking with Artem about that process. Fast forward to 2025, with the introduction of LLMs, we partnered again with Artem, who's now at Kellogg, and colleagues to look at how can we use large language models not only to identify portions of customer text that contain insights, but actually to read between the lines and look at all different types of texts and formulate that customer need or benefit itself. So it's really been exciting, the work that we've done. So to start off, I do want to just be clear when I say customer need, what I am talking about. I am talking about the benefit that the customer seeks from using our product or partnering or collaborating with us, right? And we know that needs can take many shapes and sizes. And we know that for effective innovation, understanding needs in sufficient detail is very important, right? If we hear from our customers, and I'm sure you do all the time, I need the product faster. It needs to be easier to use. It should be durable. It's too high level. It's not something that's really going to inform our ideation or innovation. So these are the levers we can turn when we understand our customers. Now, a common misconception when people hear voice of customer, they think, well, this is any conversation with customers, and all the time customers are telling me the solutions that they want, they're telling me the technical specifications, and they're sharing a lot of opinions, right? So an example I have up here relates to bedding, right? So an example of a solution in this category would be if a customer said, a memory foam mattress will help me sleep better. Right? That doesn't tell me the need that the memory foam mattress necessarily is solving. They're dictating the solution, right? Or a target value. The customer might say the mattress should be at least 12 inches thick and have a firmness rating of 6 out of 10. Okay, well, why? Well, why are you asking for that particular spec? What would that do for you? Okay, and opinions. Casper makes the best mattresses. That's an insight, that's sentiment, but that's not voice of customer. In this example, the need, always wake up feeling well rested. Notice the difference. We're not specifying that it's a Casper. We're not specifying that it's memory foam or the dimensions of the bed, right? We're specifying the need. So it's nuanced, right? And VOC is all about getting underneath the solutions that customers give us to understand the benefit that they really need. Okay, so when we think about VOC frameworks, and the AI-powered VOC that I'll be discussing, what we're talking about is understanding a complete and comprehensive set of customer needs. So not just a random sampling of what people may be saying in reviews or saying in customer service calls. We want it to be comprehensive. We also want it to be in the customer's words. And this is critical because honestly, the customer can't be in the room with us all the time. And so to have the words that they're using and to be able to look back at those words, we can use that to inspire our ideation and our path forward in product development, okay? We're also talking about an organizational framework, which I'll show you next, called a needs hierarchy. Oftentimes when we're doing voice of customer, we're uncovering 80, 90, 120 needs, which is just entirely too much for a team to handle. It's also too much for a customer to handle if you're asking them, say, to prioritize items or trade items off in a survey, right? So a hierarchy helps us organize our effort, and we also want to understand directly from customers what's most critical, right? What's most important to you, and how am I doing, or how is the market doing on this? Are you satisfied? Are you not? And really diving into those two dimensions. So historically, and many of you have probably done voice of customer research in the past, this involves qualitative and quantitative research. So qualitatively, we're doing structured, skilled interviews with customers to dig deep. We're creating the needs hierarchy, and then we're moving to a quantitative measurement where we're going back out to a larger sample of customers and segments, and we're understanding their needs priority, okay? So this framework, the needs hierarchy, I have a lot of B2B clients that actually stop here, right? They're dealing with a limited universe of customers, and they say just hearing and understanding how my customers talk and think about these areas of interest is valuable, okay? And so we look here and we see some levels of aggregation. We have the 100 or so needs that we uncover from our conversations. We have 20 or 30 buckets not based on our organizational chart, right? Griffin and Hauser talk about this extensively in their research, but organized in the way that customers think, right? So we want to keep the customer's perspective there always. And then there's also a higher level of aggregation, which is primary. Companies want to think in these larger buckets of what category of the journey or of the customer's higher level needs do these items fit in, right? So we have the hierarchy. I have an example up here, washing machines, right? So you see at the secondary level, there's high level needs that you would expect to see in the category. Makes my clothes feel clean, washes my clothes quickly, etc. Underneath makes my clothes feel clean, there's a number of detailed level needs around getting stains out, keeping whites white, making my clothes smell clean, right? This is the rich detail that we need. So if this need comes out as a high priority for innovation, we can double click and understand that detail, the customer's words, the customer's context, and have that empathy, okay? One more framework, and then we'll get to the LLM piece. This market opportunity matrix is very powerful. So I mentioned importance and performance. When we cross these two dimensions, we can understand how to address each customer need that exists, right? So up and down or on the y-axis, we have importance or criticality. And across the bottom, we have satisfaction or performance from low to high. And so what we end up with when we do a scatter plot of needs, and I'll show you this in a case study I'll share in just a few minutes, are minimum requirements, right? So these are needs that customers are saying, listen, it's important to me, but you're already doing well enough. So as the product manager, I then know I better have that in my next iteration of the product, but I'm not necessarily going to invest in changing anything, right? Leave it like it is. On the other end, we have focus areas, right? These are areas that customers are saying, this is something that's important to me, but you know what? When I think about your brand, when I think about the market as a whole, I could be more satisfied, right? There's something missing there. So that tells me if I'm going to spend time ideating, I better look up here first at the focus areas. There's also areas that might be overemphasized, right? So customers might say, you know what? You're doing great, but not the most important thing. So that might give us a hint as to where we might de-emphasize our efforts or mine resources. And then finally, there are potential hidden opportunities. So these are needs that customers are telling us aren't that important today, and they're not well satisfied currently, right? Now, it could be that they're truly unimportant and not worth focusing on, but it could be, if a technology emerges, that this is something that could truly differentiate. So an example I like to share here is from a colleague of mine. And years ago, this was probably about 10 years ago at this point, she was doing some voice of customer work for an exterior door manufacturer, okay? And she tells the story that she was sitting in a room with a group of executives, and there was a need in the lower left in the hidden opportunities area of the matrix that read something like, able to know who's at my door without going to my door. And she tells the story better than I do, but she said, I was sinking down in my seat when they were going through this data because I was wondering how that even got in there, and I was a little embarrassed. Now, to be fair, I don't know that our client in that instance was interested in getting into door technology and doorbells, but today, fast forward, we have Ring doorbell, and when people think about the concept of their front door, that idea of having the ability, having the technology to see who's there has really changed the importance of that need. So sometimes that can happen. Technology comes out and the customer says, yeah, actually, now that that's there, it is something that's important to me. Okay, so this is all well and good. We're all on board with the importance of VOC in the front end, right? But we know that it takes a lot of work, right? Traditional VOC relies on good interviewing, right? So you need to have trained people, whether consultants or your own team, probing and understanding customers in a systematic way, right? And it's a lot of time. I would say when we're doing qualitative interviews and quantitative surveys, my average engagement is 4 or 5 months. It's a long time. But the fact of the matter is that even in B2B categories, your customers are talking all the time. They're talking to you in chatbots or on emails. they're talking in forums, they're talking in subreddits, right? There's a lot of information that can be gleaned from sources that aren't traditional, okay? So there's a lot of information floating around. When we look at traditional consumer categories, there's just a volume of customer interaction and feedback that we're seeing, okay? I think there's a little bit of a text issue here, but we have 11 customer service calls per year, 60 million online reviews. This says 2 hours a day on social media. I would argue for younger generations, it's even higher than that. 3 billion active users on social medias, tons and tons of forums. So it's hard to keep track of all of this information. And when we think about this in a B2B context, I'm collaborating with my clients all the time. You have email communications from your customers, you have chatbot data, you have website inquiries. You might even have open-ended responses from your surveys that maybe you just haven't even had time to really dive into and analyze and look at. YouTube channels, the comment sections of YouTube, subreddits, industry forums, specialized social media groups. I mean, it is overwhelming. There's a lot of information. Added on top of that, it's challenging to formulate needs. I mentioned that customers default to specs and solutions, especially in B2B categories, they do that. If you're going to identify customer needs from conversation, you're going to need to understand industry dynamics. You're going to need to understand the product, the brand. You're going to have some intelligence around VOC analysis, right? Practice and training. So it is challenging to formulate the needs. It's also challenging to keep track of all the places that our customers are talking, right? The question, what if AI could help us with this? What if it could formulate customer needs on all of this text data that we have? Okay, let's rewind to 2018 because I think it's helpful to understand where the technology has gone and where we've taken this. So back in 2018, we collaborated with Dr. Artem Tomashenko, who was then at MIT, as I mentioned, on an NLP algorithm to understand customer insights in user-generated content. Essentially, what that means is where your customers are talking, where are the needs, right? And we were successful in that, and we had a lot of exciting client outcomes. One I talked about in 2023 was the work that we did with Western Plow to really change the way that they design their trucks to fix a key lighting problem that was apparent with the way that drivers were commenting on their ability to visualize when they were making tight turns, okay? But the issue with that was that we still had to train the algorithm every single time. So what that looked like in practice is my team had to take a subset of whatever text data we had to go through a sample, we had to tell it what was an insight and what wasn't, right? We had to run the model, and then what we got back was essentially text reduction, right? It wasn't the customer needs, it was just blurbs of text that said, Kristyn, if you read these 1,000 blurbs of text, you'll be able to find the needs that exist in all of these sources, okay? So it wasn't formulating the need. What we've done now is taken it a step further to build a large language model to do just that. So I'll explain a bit about how we did it, but what we've developed is a fine-tuned LLM or large language model. So again, think ChatGPT, but tailored for VOC to identify and formulate customer needs from any type of text, okay? And again, we partnered with Artem Tomashenko, John Hauser, and Chengfeng Mao. They've submitted a paper for publication that I actually just had a call with them on Monday. They're in final revisions on that, and we're really excited to have it published. All right, you might be thinking, okay, Kristyn, this all sounds well and good, but why don't we just ask ChatGPT to give us the needs, right? We can upload a customer interview transcript. We can upload customer reviews. Let's go ahead and just do that. Well, we did that as part of the research, and Artem talks about this in his paper. And what we found is that what ChatGPT returns is a couple things. So if you put in a customer interview, they're returning very high-level primary needs, right? So like I mentioned before, product must be easy to use. Product must be durable, right? Not the detail we need for innovation. ChatGPT also defaults to the spec or solution because that's easier to find in human language, right? It's less nuanced than the need. So it would go to the example that I gave before. If we put in an interview about mattresses, it would tell me, oh, the customer wants a mattress that's 12 inches thick, right? So not the need. There's also hallucination risks, right? And we've heard about that with other AI technology where maybe it is making up answers actually that the customers didn't say based on other data. And then there's privacy concerns. You don't want to be putting your proprietary voice of the customer information into a public platform, right? So we fine-tuned this large language model. The base large language model was Vicuña 13B, and the new model is called Vicuña GPT VOC 13B. So how did we fine-tune the model? Essentially, what we did is we took our decades of experience of doing VOC and having many, many VOC projects under our belt, and we trained the LLM using that data. And we intentionally trained the LLM using data from a variety of industries, right? So even though you may be thinking, okay, my application is technical, it's B2B, it's in coatings, it's in chemicals, having a large language model that learns like my analysts learn across a number of different industries allows it to better understand what a customer need looks like and what it is. So you'll see a varying mix here from sleep aids to men's shaving to telehealth to women's apparel to glucose monitoring and snowplows and activewear, right? So lots and lots of background VOC. And we trained the LLM like we train our entry-level analysts, right? We gave it information about what VOC was and what a customer need was. And we fine-tuned it, right? When the model would come back after reading a transcript and give us a set of needs, we gave it feedback, just like I would an analyst that works on my team. And so the result was a fine-tuned LLM that can perform and process text data like a human analyst. We did experiments to understand how the VOC LLM performed compared to humans. And what we found is that it performed on par with human analysts, and in some cases better, okay? And one of the reasons why it can perform better in some cases is because it doesn't fatigue, right? We all get tired when we read text. Another reason is that it doesn't bring bias, right? We all bring a bias when we're conducting customer interviews and when we're analyzing data. The GPT does not. So it's able to get into those corners of the data and actually surface many more needs in volume than humans do. So it's really exciting. Another thing we tried to do was poke holes in the type of needs that the LLM could identify. So I was convinced that, maybe the LLM would be sufficient in identifying functional needs and maybe some of the more basic needs, right? But hard as we've tried, in all of the cases that we've done and the client work that we've done over the past year, we haven't noticed a pattern in the type of needs that it can't uncover, which is really exciting. So when you think about experiential needs, think about emotional needs. When you think about niche or very specific needs that customers may have in a given category, it's able to do that, which is great. All right, so there's the theory. I'd like to share 3 case studies. So I want to show you how my clients have been using this method and what's come of it, okay? So my first example is consumer. I'm intentionally starting consumer because it's something we can all relate to. It's poultry, okay, chicken products. Had a well-known brand of chicken products come to us looking to do AI-powered VOC, or they were intrigued by the offering and they wanted to try it out. And their question was a very broad VOC-based question, right? They said, we want to get rich new insights, to drive competitive advantage in the poultry category, okay? So very broad. What's out there? What's the next big thing in chicken? Okay. And apologize, there's some font that didn't carry over, but we will move on. This is the process that we went through with our poultry client. The first thing that we had to do was have a brainstorming session to understand where customers were talking, okay? And inevitably what happens is, commonly, my clients know a few places where they're casually monitoring customer chatter, as we call it. So maybe there's a few Facebook groups, a few review sites where there's comments and you have someone checking on it periodically, right? We sit down together and we compile those sources. And then my team also goes out and finds more sources. So we wanted to know, where are all the places where people are talking about chicken? And we review these sources to understand, where are they expressing insights, right? Not just, I really like, this particular type of Tyson chicken tender, but really about their needs, about food preparation, meal prep, sort of spanning that chicken experience. I know it sounds ridiculous. Who thought you would be thinking this directly about chicken, but here we are. So what we did is we identified those sources. So that's step number one. You get the text data off of those sources, right? So if it lives in Facebook, you scrape it off Facebook. If it lives in a forum, you scrape it off the forum. And you feed that into the LLM. And then the LLM runs and provides you with that list of customer needs that exists in that corpus of text, okay? We do have human analysts here still involved in the process. So I don't want you to think what I'm suggesting is, okay, we don't need humans now, we just have this LLM. They're a vital part of the process still. In some instances, humans are doing a subset of the analysis, right? Maybe they're taking a subset of the data and they're reading it over, and we're using that in combination with what the LLM uncovers. They're also involved in creating the needs hierarchy and the final insights report, right? What does it all mean? But value add things, okay? No interviews were done for this. This was only on readily available chatter online, okay? So how does it do it, right? I want to read this to you. This is an example verbatim that the LLM surfaced a need from, because we can track back actually to where the need's coming from, which is really cool too, just like you would in traditional VOC. Oh man, this woman's really, really passionate about this particular chicken experience. So she says, I'm still dancing over here after savoring, but not quite feeling like I'm indulging on these Real Good Foods Company lightly breaded chicken breast strips. They have so much good in them that I can eat them and not feel guilty while still enjoying every last delicious bite. They always hit the spot, and I can't buy enough to keep my family happy and satisfied. We all love them, and we'll continue stocking our freezer with them. Okay, so great, passionate interview there. The need that our AI-powered GPT for VOC uncovered was a product that doesn't make me feel guilty, e.g. feel satisfied and not overindulged. Okay, but something you'll notice is that she mentions multiple needs in this, right? And that's typical of VOC, right? Customers aren't going to talk in clean need statements. We wish they would, but you have to read between the lines to understand that. So what the LLM is actually doing in this case is choosing the stronger representation and also remembering from its review of other text in the corpus what need has already been mentioned, right? So it knows in this case, I haven't heard doesn't make me feel guilty when eating it before. That is the strong need here, and that is what I'm going to surface from this verbatim. So again, no interviews conducted, all online chatter, pulling customer needs from that information. What do we get? Really exciting. We got 160 customer needs from this. Now understand, the LLM surfaced 139 of those. My team added an additional 21 from their analysis. Okay, so we're talking about 160 needs, which is quite large for a voice of customer project, right? From 6,978 comments. Okay, so we're talking robust, full voice of customer data that allows us to build the needs hierarchy from customer chatter alone. An interesting finding. We asked the question, if the team didn't read the transcripts to get those 21 needs, could we still get this secondary level of aggregation here? And the answer was yes. And this really excited our academic partners because they said, wait a minute, you're telling me that there's a tertiary or detailed level need mapped to every secondary that AMS created. So basically every secondary could have been created hypothetically without the human presence. Now, I'm not saying that those 21 needs that the humans identified are unimportant. There may be reason to have those in there, especially as you're drilling down after you decide where you want to ideate and act upon, right? Those tertiary needs are critical. But if your aim is to go more quickly into ideation, right, which a lot of us are under time pressure, or more quickly maybe into quantitative survey research, then the AI alone can really help teams to do that. The other piece here for my poultry client, I can't name them, but I will in the next case study, they were able to map their needs across the customer journey. So customer journey mapping, we're all familiar with it, I'm sure. They were able to map the needs and look at what are we hearing in terms of purchasing, preparing, cooking, consuming, storing, disposing, researching, and meal prep, right? So we're able to map those needs across the journey. And we're also able to understand the sentiment in which those needs are talked about, right? So when a customer is expressing a need, they're using language that indicates, okay, this is something that they're happy about, or maybe it's something that they're not happy about. So that's another layer that our clients use in analyzing these data. So in summary, for poultry, we were able to mine online content, put the LLM for VOC on that content, and surface a comprehensive needs hierarchy. And we also learned that the LLM was uncovering detailed needs that humans missed. Okay, and we also learned that it was uncovering needs in sufficient detail for innovation. From a workflow perspective, okay, for my day-to-day, for your team's day-to-day that will be doing this VOC, those of you that have done this can speak to the more time-consuming factors in the process, right? Qualifying criteria, screening documents, recruitments, interviews, transcription, compiling the data, right? Where with the LLM, we're kicking off and aligning on objectives, identifying sources and compiling the data, and then we're moving to analysis. Okay, so a process that was taking months before can take weeks. Here's our second case study, and apologize, I think I'm using a font that maybe your Mac doesn't have, but that's okay. In this instance, okay, so in this instance, the partnership I can talk about. So we, AMS, did a full voice of the customer research project for PDMA. The PDMA is the Product Development and Management Association. I sit on that board. It has been probably 25 years since PDMA has done voice of customer research, so it was long overdue. Okay, and they had a few questions, right, going into this. They wanted to do voice of customer to understand what's driving membership, right, in this professional organization that links practitioners, academics, and service providers like myself in the discipline. Why do people stay? Why do people join? Why do people leave? And what do future members want and need? Okay, so typical voice of customer questions. What did we do? In this case, so different from poultry, we did traditional voice of customer interviews. I did them, my team did them at their conference last September and also following the conferences with some non-members. Okay, we did qualitative interviews, we did 21. And we surfaced the needs hierarchy using human analysts and AI. And then we moved to quantitative measurement. So that opportunity matrix I showed at the start of the talk, we have data that shows what was unearthed there. So let's take a look at the results here. In this instance, we had two parallel work streams. We had the human analyst reading every single transcript, and we had the GPT for VOC reading all of the transcripts as well. So we're able to do a side-by-side comparison of what one was able to cover and what the other one was able to cover and where the overlap was. Okay, so what do we see here? See these funnels? We see that this is typical of what I would expect from human readers. 512 needs, unique needs, 512 needs, 415 duplicate needs, 97, so on the range of 100 uncovered from reading transcripts. Great. But then we see the AI generated needs, right? A lot more, 1,153, but also a lot more duplicates, to be fair, but it's really getting into the corners of that data. And then we get a final list of 124. We went through an exercise of merging the two and came to a list of 115 needs, okay? So what did we notice here? Well, there was a lot of overlap between what the AI surfaced and what humans surfaced, which is great. It's great validity for the AI methodology. So 64%. About 20% of the needs only humans found, and about 15% of the needs only the AI found, okay? And again, we tried to poke holes in this. We said, well, are there any themes or are there any patterns as to what the AI can uncover that humans can't, or vice versa? And we really weren't able to find a consistent theme there, only to know that there is a percentage that humans find that AI doesn't, and vice versa, okay? But I want to call your attention to the middle here where we look at the overlap, because you'll see that there's similar needs, and you can see the different language, the human-generated language and the AI-generated language, both just different variations of the same customer need. Like if you had two analysts reading a transcript, right? They might word something a little bit differently. So the human-generated need is confident event staff maintains professionalism, even if they're volunteers. And the AI-generated need from that same content is assured the conference has a professional atmosphere, not too casual. What we were able to do in this instance is develop that needs hierarchy. And I showed this as a reminder of the output, and also to let you know that we took the middle level of that hierarchy and we fielded a quantitative survey of 106 individuals to understand the opportunity areas for PDMA for innovation, member retention, member attraction. Okay, and here's a reminder of that matrix. Again, we want to be looking in the upper left here, needs that are highly important but not well served, as well as investigating areas in the lower left here, needs that maybe today people don't find important but could represent future possibilities, okay? And we did this through a choice-based exercise. We find that max diff works really well because you're forcing people to make a trade-off, right? You don't get the phenomenon where someone says, okay, it's a 100-point scale. I'm going to use a 90 to 100 point because everything's really important. Rather, they see subsets of needs in this case, and they have to make trade-offs and talk about what's least important and what's most important among those subsets of needs. Now, what did we find? I apologize. This is a lot to absorb on first glance. There's also a black box in there. I'm not sure why. Well, that's fun. We'll just roll with it. So you'll see this is an example of how VOC data can be plotted on a market opportunity matrix to inform strategy, right? And you'll see that each need is falling within one of these quadrants, as well as some on the cusp, right? So there's some judgment to be had, right? And you may have prior knowledge and say, well, you know, that's on the cusp, but I have reason to believe that actually maybe it is an area for investigation, so we're going to tackle it. Let's talk about what the PDMA found from this. I actually just had a board meeting early May, so this is fresh, and this is something that's informing their events immediately. So their next event is in September. One of their large sources of revenues, as you may imagine, is certification, right? They need that. They're a nonprofit, but they need to sustain revenue to be in existence, right? And they were convinced going into this that that was going to be the area where they needed to innovate, right? And I see this all the time when companies try to predict what the customer is going to pinpoint as the future area for focus. And really, they were right that it was important. But what they missed is that there really wasn't much of a need to change it, right? It's a minimum requirement. Yes, a professional association should have training and certification. I should be able to get the knowledge that I need, right? So that was eye-opening, right? It's a minimum requirement. We don't need to innovate. We don't need to change. But what was really interesting were the needs that fell over on the left-hand side of the graph here. So you'll see in the upper left, customers are saying the most important thing is I can apply the information I get to real life scenarios. It supports my career. The networking helps my career. I have value in this membership. I'll add that these needs are shortened. There's a lot of detail that lives underneath them. But what this is saying is that potential members want personalized experiences, right? They want the information that they're consuming not just to be academically sound. Of course, they value that, but it needs to be applicable right away, and it needs to help them personally. Okay, so that really was eye-opening to know that that was something that needed attention. Additionally, in the hidden opportunities, there was another interesting theme, and that was the theme of community. It was the theme of community. So if you think about what you can get online from a professional organization, you can go on and read articles, you can go attend webinars, right? You can even comment on articles maybe, right? But that sense of community, not necessarily there. And so you look at the themes here and you see, I can easily connect and network. The events are engaging. I have information and contacts across industries. I can collaborate, right? It's a welcoming community. So this is something that could potentially be an opportunity for disruption. And when we look at the needs that only the fine-tuned LLM unearthed relative to human analysts, we see a unique framing of this idea of community. So this was really interesting to us, as well as the academics that we're partnering with on the AI-powered VOC. So we know that the detail underneath community is important to drive PDMA's strategy. So here's some needs that the fine-tuned LLM uncovered that humans didn't. A community for product leaders who are between jobs, able to break down barriers and pave the way for others in my field for women in leadership roles. Able to easily switch between sessions if I feel like I'm not getting enough industry or career-specific value. Able to network with both for-profit and nonprofit organizations at events. Able to interact with the people who are shaping the future of the industry, and able to join an association that values my career goals. Able to get my paper published, able to guide clients for consulting services. Okay, so you'll see this framing that the LLM allowed them to get through that analysis. So really exciting stuff. So in summary, we got the needs hierarchy. We got needs that human analysts miss and a new framing of this idea of community, which is really important to PDMA and a focus area for them. We were able to do analysis by segment, right? So we were able to isolate and look at practitioners and look at academics and build strategies based on what they wanted. And we got results in weeks instead of months. Last example, and then I'll open it up for questions. So this example is a recent engagement that I led about composite siding. And this is an interesting one. So back in 2020, I had done research for this client, not VOC research, but concept testing research. So in this instance, there were two different types of siding. And because it was COVID, this actually happened like right as COVID was happening, we mailed out samples of composite siding to contractors and homeowners. And we asked them questions about the look, the feel, which one do you like, A, B, you know, all the questions you would ask in a concept test. So it wasn't VOC. And my client said, Kristyn, I wonder if we put the GPT VOC on these interviews done in 2020, if we could get a needs hierarchy. Okay, so we're not VOC interviews, concept testing interviews. See where I'm going with this. All right, so we had 32 interviews that we did, concept testing interviews. We got 3,901 customer needs from these interviews about a concept. And we went and we built the needs hierarchy and we deduped. We had 103 tertiary needs, we had 30 secondary needs, and we had 6 primary level needs. So typical of what you would see in voice of customer analysis, which was really exciting. Okay. The categories that we were able to surface mirrored what the client would expect to see for primary buckets of needs, right? So we have ordering and purchasing, we have brand, we have design, texture and appearance, materials and install, durability, right? So some face validity there. Another exciting finding of the output that we had at the end of the study, 91% of the customer needs were produced by the LLM and 9% by human analysts. So in this instance, my team did take a subset of the interviews to read them and to make sure that we weren't missing anything. That represented 9% of the needs, 91 were produced by the LLM. Okay, so this was really exciting for my client. And I actually had a chance to debrief with her a little bit more before this session because, of course, I wanted to make sure she was okay with me sharing the information that I'm sharing today. And she said, Kristyn, you actually left out one of the other advantages that we got from this research. And she's like, you might not like this advantage, but it's smarter spend on our consulting. It's actually less spend, right? Because she's looking at this and saying, okay, I can do a concept test and also get a full VOC out of it, right? So it's allowing her to scale and spend more efficiently, which she was really excited about. And she said, truthfully, this helps me to sell, doing this internally because it allows us to be efficient. It allows us to be efficient with our efforts, okay? And like I said before, same thing, we pressure tested the idea. Is there a type of need that the LLM is surfacing or not surfacing? And we found that it was identifying all types of needs in this category. We also looked at the themes, right? We looked back at our concept testing report and we said, is there something that we got in one or the other that we didn't get with the GPT, okay? And what we actually found was that in this instance, there were unique insights related to the purchase process and the brand that my team didn't get from the concept test. And I hypothesize is that the reason why is that we had bias, right? It was a concept test. We weren't looking for insights on the purchase process or the brand. And I mean, that's fair. You always want to focus on the questions your client has, but there's information in those interviews that is valuable to them, right? So what this allowed us to do is to get different type of information with no bias from those interviews. Of course, the concept test had information about reputation and the concept preference itself. The LLM, we weren't asking the LLM to do that. So of course, no, it didn't. The LLM is really specialized on finding those customer needs. So in summary, I mentioned her benefit on smarter consulting spend, which is great. It does make me happy that she's able to realize that. You see the ability to reduce your timeline, right? So even if you are doing interviews, and I understand a lot of you may have to do a subset of interviews just based on lack of user-generated content out there, the analysis process is quicker. The analysis process gets into corners of the data that your team might not, right? And surfaces those really detailed level needs that are necessary for innovation that you might not have seen otherwise. Because remember, going back to the talk this morning, the whole reason we're doing this is for competitive advantage so that we know our customers better than anybody else. And that requires going in depth, right? And someone asked me in the one-on-ones yesterday, if I'm just looking at user-generated content and content that's out there, doesn't everybody else just know that information? And yes, I would argue if you're just sampling it and checking it periodically, right, or reading, skimming, yeah, you're getting what everybody else is getting. But when you're pulling a comprehensive volume of this information and you're then putting a specialized LLM on it that can read between the lines and formulate needs and benefits, I would argue that you're getting information that they don't have. Okay, so there's lots of exciting implications for us in the B2B world and timelines and the type of insights that we're able to uncover from all these different types of data. Okay, so it's really exciting. I'm so happy to be here and that you guys fit me in here to talk about this new advancement in the field. It's exciting that it can handle all sorts of different types of data sources, that it's fast, it's efficient, and it's more comprehensive than before. So thank you very much. I'll share a QR code here if you want some more information or resources, but I think we got about 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah. Let's put them on. Tim back there.
All right. So you talked about hallucination as a possible risk for using AI. In the 3 case studies, you didn't mention hallucination at all. Is that because you were using humans as kind of the checkpoint?
That's a really good question. I would want to talk to Artem about how he controls for that in Vicuña. But my understanding is that the fine tuning does control for that, as well as the fact that something like a public LLM like ChatGPT is using a lot of different information from a myriad of sources.
Yeah.
In the case of AI-powered VOC, I'm only feeding it your data, so the instance of hallucination is just less generally because it's dealing with just your data.
Okay, great, thanks.
But great question.
Yeah.
More questions?
Hey, Kristyn. As always, great presentation. Great presentation, and the framework makes sense. The affinity and all the VOC processes make sense. And I'm still caught up in this black box of how does the thing do what it does? Because it's intimidating trying to figure out. I understand the flow and the process and the output, but there's this black box in the middle that either Artem or somebody created somehow.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, and there is some sort of black box around something like a ChatGPT too, right? And understanding how that has been created and how it continues to really respond like a human being would. What I can provide you on that is a few things. Number one, the whole advantage of a large language model is that it can understand language and predict human response, right? And just like my comment at the start of the session about those conference coordinators asking what fictional character I would be and putting the GPT in a framework in that way, we can fine tune and put it in a VOC analyst mindset in that way. So through fine tuning it, you're able to get it to understand language like a VOC analyst would. So that's my researcher interpretation. In terms of the technical, I assure you that will all be in the paper that will be published soon. And if you want to talk to Artem, I'm happy to connect and he can share more about how it was created. But great question.
We'll just move it to the other side of the table. 2 related questions. You talked about needs associated with segments.
Yes.
So does the LLM do the segmentation itself? And if so, does it also do segment size associated with the needs? And how does it do that within the context of the information that you're feeding?
It's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. I'll take the last part of your question first on segment size. That is a future, you're not the first person to request that. That is a future potential innovation. It does not currently quantify size of segment, right? What it's good at doing is understanding the customer needs. How we're accomplishing that at present is through traditional quantitative methods, right? So you take what the LLM gives you and you move it into a survey. We're also looking into innovations that help with the winnowing process of needs. So you'll notice in the output that I showed, it does output a lot of needs. I'll share a funny example in the PDMA case. It is so good at identifying needs that it actually pulled out a need related to a comment that someone made to me during the interview about the temperature of the room, right? So it's literally pulling out every need it hears in the conversation, but there's opportunity to really continue down the process and understand how could it quantify, prioritize, et cetera. What we can overlay on top of it now is that segment analysis and sentiment analysis. The way that my team is doing that now is through tagging source data so we understand where the comments are coming from. So for example, in the poultry instance, if there was a segment of millennial parents, for example, and they wanted to understand that relative to those aging in place, tag the sources and look at the unique insights there. And inevitably what we see is there's usually some overlap, but then there are unique needs by segment. Mm-hmm.
Is that identified as niche by the system, or is that done through manual after the fact?
Can you clarify the question?
So it said it can capture all the different types of needs, one of which is niche. Niche by definition is like a small subsegment.
Right.
So is that done manually, or is that done by the system as identifying as like, this is a small segment? We can't tell you how small.
Right.
But
Great question. Yeah. So in terms of identifying if a need is niche or not, there's the answer is both. So you can understand the sources of the text where the need is coming from. So if it's coming from multiple areas, it'll show you a lot of different source data that's driving that need, right? Which would tell me, is it niche or not? But also in the level of detail, my team, it is something happening on the back end. They might read something and say, this was mentioned several times, but it's very niche and that it's very specific. Like one that comes to mind is in PDMA about networking with nonprofits and profit companies. Like that's very, very niche. So, yeah. Else?
Kristyn, I had one real quick.
Yes.
Now, is the model available as a sort of a RAD model, so to speak, where the information or data is input just for my use case, or does it go into the bigger database with AMS?
Really good question. So just to repeat, because I know that mic volume might have been varying. Does my data go in on its own, or does it go in combination, with other clients? There's varying preference on that, right? So we know these large language models get smarter over time and they can learn from other case studies. However, I do have clients that don't want their data in something that other clients' data has been in. So it's really a case-by-case basis. Either is good.
If not, let's thank Kristyn.
Thank you.
Goodies for you.